I was essentially spiritually bankrupt, as I used a knowledge of a God, and I used a spiritual knowledge in church participation to give my brain a pass that I was covering that checkbox.
The 100 Proof Living Podcast.
This idea of a conversation between a criminal and a cop is really just a conversation between two guys.
With Chris Pridmore and Brian Yates.
It's going to start with you being honest with yourself. Look at who you're hurting through any activity you're having. It's usually an indicator, and it would have been an indicator for me.
All right, welcome back to Conversations with a Cop and a Criminal. I'm Brian.
I'm Chris.
And these are our thoughts thrown up on a table together.
It's amazing. Good image.
Yeah.
It's been one of those weeks. I was just joking with you earlier about finding out what the winter's done to me with weight. So I've got a bunch of baby T-shirts apparently in my closet now.
It's your dryer.
Yeah.
So what we got going on this week as far as conversations, you had spoken about stigma, and I'd love to hear just kind of your thoughts on not a clinical definition, but kind of a working definition of stigma.
It seems like it's thrown around everywhere. Obviously, we talked in the last episode really about my background with addiction, and clearly stigma is something they're taking a look at as almost debilitating. I look at stigma generally as a hostage taker. So, you think about there's not one stigma that's put on any individual. We put a bunch of them on people. You as a police officer, a military guy, you probably had a ton of stuff that was put on you. Depending on my social group, I'm going to have different stigmas that are put on me, and I'm going to do the same thing to other people too. So I think it's just these comfortable labels we put to categorize people in so we understand what they are or to keep us safe. Yeah.
So is there ever an accurate or a good use of stigma?
I don't know. It's something you and I have talked about is there? It's I think it is when it comes to a place. I think people use it as a safe place. So if I know that that's an addict, or you're a this, or you're a that, it puts you away from me. So I don't have to deal with that in a way that I may not know how to deal with you. I certainly in the addiction world, that's exactly why people are putting these labels on people, because they forget the humanity of it. It's really easy to take a complex problem like getting somebody on a place of recovery and just saying you're a X, you're a drunk, you're a druggie, you're a loser, you're whatever. And, the other part is we get so far involved with combating that by saying, oh, no, you got to change the words you use. And I think there's value in that to a certain point when you're saying, no, that's somebody struggling with addiction, or it's somebody that has a substance abuse disorder. I get all that and why we're trying to soften it up. But the fact of the matter is we can solve this problem. What you speak about is we appreciate the fact that they're human, they're people, and they have value. Whether we agree with the lifestyle and the choices they have, that's a completely different thing.
Well, and I think, just by the way you explain that, stigma, I would always have kind of thought of it as labels, but it's really more of a box. I'm going to choose to put you in that box. And, it seems like the older I get, the more our culture chooses to do that. And, for me, it's a barrier. And so, it was funny. We're both Cubs fans. I spent a lot of time in Chicago. And in Chicago, you are a Cubs fan or you are a White Sox fan.
No middle ground.
And right. And what's funny is, and that's just one thing. We can talk about political parties. We can talk about religious affiliations, sexual preference, all of the other kind of hot button topics of today. But it seems like when we meet someone new, we put this filter on them. We're going to look for that stigma. And to me, I would call stigma a barrier, right? It's a box that we put someone in so that I don't have to deal with them, or, I'm going to, in law enforcement, we certainly carry tons of stigma. And, but, looking out into the, call it law-breaking part of our community, it's easy to put stigmas on someone and see them one-dimensionally as, that person is an addict, or that person is an abuser of, a spousal abuser, that person is an angry person. So it's not, to me, just a label that we, even in my history, I would put on someone. It was I put them in that box, and that's the only way I dealt with them. Know? So I think that's probably where I see it as being so powerfully negative.
You talked about a certain thing, though. It's interesting as you're mentioning that. It struck me. We had a conversation one time about how you were early on as a police officer and your thoughts about people. And then as you got seasoned, I was kind of shocked by this because truthfully, I would think, knowing my personality, and you and I have a very similar personality in terms of our tolerance of people's nonsense.
Right.
I would think that if I was a police officer, at the end of my career, I'd probably be the crankiest human being on the planet. I certainly wouldn't go out of my way to be caring for people. And you actually seemed to share with me a sense that your stigmas and who I know you to be softened over time. You kind of understood the humanity, and there were some people out there that are actually worth putting the time in. Right.
And some of that's probably maturity, and I think some of that's just having been around some really amazing other people in law enforcement, and they modeled this for me. But yeah, when I first got in to law enforcement, I was in the military, and I was 19 years old, had a badge and a gun, and I had always had a passion for law enforcement. It was one of those things I didn't really know why. I just kind of thought it was cool, and I really wanted to do it. And so, I got out there early on, and it was very much I'm going to go find the lawbreaker. I'm going to go find the kind of injustice, and I'm going to bring justice to the situation. And as I got older, and that caused a lot of problems because, like we all try to explain to the officer that pulls us over, why we were speeding. Yeah. Right. And I was early on a guy that I don't care why you were doing it. You were doing it, so it's wrong. And, here's your citation, or here are your free bracelets, or, whatever. But looking at that, too, though, even of yourself and that attitude you had, and that's a lot of – so this is such a complex subject. It's hard to – it'd be really easy to get micromanaging on it. But unfortunately, when I'm hearing you say that, it reminds me very much of how you've said this. I've noticed it, and I actually was talking to another current law enforcement person this week, in a good way. I wasn't in trouble. But he was also saying that there's this fine line between being a police officer and abiding by the law and actually enforcing the law, and then in terms of the person and the choices that we make, as opposed to me, a convicted felon, for my addiction and the result of a lot of the behaviors I had that addictional gave me free license to do. You look at that split, and I really feel like, in my history, I've never shared this with you before, but I took the police exam. I went through all that stuff, and I actually had aspirations of doing that. So how does that? How do I decide to go? Well, we're going to go the other way on this path because I don't know. I'm not real comfortable in that uniform, and I may have a weight fluctuation in the winter of 2018. Yeah. I'm really hoping that down the road I can do this conversation with a cop, so I can't also be a cop. I might as well be the criminal. Yeah. Where's that bottle? But going back to the kind of my transition, which I think is where some of this conversation should go, is about the transition, and this is our desire to always swim upstream. And how can we help people to learn to appreciate others? How can we help people to avoid the dumpster fire that their life is going to become if they continue? Thanks, Brian. Well, at least it's been put out at this point, but the damage still prevails, right? I mean, that's the idea of this. But for me, the transition became. One thing I really used to struggle with was juveniles. I was kind of as you can imagine, a cocky kid growing up, and for some reason, isn't it ironic that I can then not tolerate the cocky kid when I'm older? It was the Beastie Boy in you. Yeah, right. Yeah, heck yeah. Fight for your right to party. But looking now, just through good examples of other people and doing some deliberate work on learning to appreciate people, I used to show up for a call on, either a disruptive child, and it's funny because sometimes it would be the parents calling in, and I'm not even kidding. When I was in my FTO, my training period, we got a call on a 7-year-old that was out of control, and the whole way there, my FTO, and I was a little older by this time when I got into municipal law enforcement, and my FTO and I were on the way to this call, and he's like, I'm not even getting out of the car. Just deal with this. This is so stupid. We had no desire to have his call, and we get out, and, here I am. At the time, I think I was, close to 40 or in my late 30s at least, and full of myself, and I can handle this. And, we go walking over there, and the woman that had made the call meets me in the yard, and she said, I don't know what to do with him. He's just totally out of control. And he was sitting on the porch, so she kind of ushered me over there. And I walk up and I said, hey, buddy, what's going on today? And he said, I'm not getting in the goddamn car. Wow. I immediately grabbed. How old is he? He's 7 years old. Holy I immediately grabbed my mic, and I'm like, I need you out here. Because I'm like, what do you do with that? Oh, I know, right? But it's funny because early on, if that had happened to me when I was in the military and I was much younger and really didn't have an appreciation for all people, I would have looked at him and, he's out of control and he's the
Yeah,
problem.
you think?
But what's funny is I immediately recognized that, there was not going to be a solution to the problem today, because the problem was, in this case, with the parents. And, it turns out, as I kind of pulled back the layers of the onion, realized that there was a whole bunch of discord. It was not his father didn't live in the home, and there was some abuses over time. And I guess the whole point of this side of the story is it took some being intentional on my part to start to look at what is the real problem here. Not what the symptom, not what is the stigma of I'm going to this low income house and so I just kind of assume I know what's going to happen, or I look at, it's this person's clearly intoxicated, so this kind of one-size-fits-all solution to just, hook them and book them.
I think that with what you're talking about, though, is this is to me a good illustration. So when we think about stigmas, we're always like that situation. You ultimately you're saying, oh, bad parent, brat kid, don't want to deal with this and all these things. You look at the actual definition of stigma. It says it's a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. So we always associate it with like those types of behaviors that, quite honestly, are complicated to deal with. So when you dug deeper on that, you realize there was a bigger situation there. They had a whole lot more going on than a kid at 7 years old using profanity and digging in his heels.
Right.
You don't know what breaking point that child got to that place. He wasn't just being a brat kid. He had a circumstance around him that was a difficult scenario, it sounds like.
Right.
But additionally in that, I look back, this show is an awful lot of, it's about the cop and the criminal sort of mantra. My history wasn't always about being a complete knucklehead drunk. I had a season in my life, a significant season over 20-some years where I was in healthcare sales and I was an executive. Had a lot of opportunity and a lot of good things happen to me and a lot of leadership awards and those things. But even in that place where you would normally not think stigma exists, it absolutely exists. And I was just thinking when you were saying that, the extreme opposite. So here you're talking about a little kid using language that's like, are you kidding me right now? But on the other side of it, I can remember going into sales meetings with these guys that are high-paid executives, and I'm like, look at this guy. He's got a T-shirt on and a sport coat. Who's he trying to kid? Why can't you just go have a drink or go out and eat and look like a normal guy in jeans? You don't have to executive up everything all the time. But again, so then immediately, because I didn't want to deal with the complexities of the image that he really felt like he had to convey, I just automatically bucketed him because that annoyed me.
Right. And that's it right there.
Yeah.
You bucketed him. And I think that we've gotten into the habit of bucketing everyone. And it can be as simple as, I meet someone in a neighborhood party. We're fairly new to the area. So a couple years ago when we started getting together and meeting people, I could sense the tendency. So they tell me that they're a Red Sox fan. Okay, there's a barrier. There's a reason to not have to deal with that person. And it's, it could be political party, all the other things we've talked about. But it's like my tendency is to immediately shove them in that box and not consider. And so my point on the learning to appreciate people is that we have to intentionally consider that everybody has value and not just see them for the stigma. What you said was it's a mark of disgrace. So there can be some bad behavior there. The addict may have caused harm, likely caused harm to themselves or to others around them. However, there's so much more going on there. And I think that's where I think we would have culturally, in society, we would have better interactions with one another if instead of painting someone, shoving them in that box, we could consider the fact that, okay, I may consider myself a conservative. And if I meet someone who is clearly announcing that they're a liberal by their shirt or by their bumper sticker or something else, that I force myself to recognize that's not all who they are. We're going to differ in that area, but that doesn't have to be a barrier.
Yeah, and again, like what you were just talking about is recognizing it first. But these are all internal things that we do. But think about the fact that we're talking about a stigma where we have to box somebody. So we take an addict, or I take the executive that I was calling out, and I actually can think of the person. Just kidding. I'm not holding a grudge at all. No. But no, I think about that situation, and this is the ridiculous part. As we put people in that place because we don't know what to deal with it. So in our mind, we automatically, okay, so you're over here. I don't know how to fix addiction. I'm going to stick you there. Or you're an executive. I don't know what your problem is. I'm going to stick you there with your little sport coat. But what happened with that? I actually acted differently and changed how I would dress going to these things. Trying so hard to make this thing easy and not deal with. Look at what it did to me individually. I refused. And to this day, you'd probably see me break out in a rash if I put a sport coat on going into a dinner, even if it was completely appropriate and necessary.
And now I get to try to scrub my brain of thinking about you with a rash. Awesome.
A rash in one of my small T-shirts from the winter.
Now it explains it.
It's all there. But seriously, I think that what we do is we think that we're putting ourselves in a safe place and managing something we don't know what to deal with or have some bias towards. And I think in a lot of cases, if we're honest with ourselves, we're actually changing our behavior and how we interact with them. You use the political thing. This is completely aggravating to me. I identify as a conservative person, too. I wouldn't say Republican, but I do have been towards more conservative issues related to not, how things manage in this country. I am not a political beast. I choose not to be in the middle of those fights. There was a day when I would have. But I've seen us get so wound up about each side of it, we're forgetting that the middle ground, we still have to live together. You go on a social media platform and you blast somebody else because of their belief, regardless of whether you agree with them or not, or get all on board and agree with somebody and get in your little clique, we're forgetting the fact that there's another person across the line. To me, that's almost more damaging than calling an addict and leaving him alone in the dirt to die than we are with what productive citizens generally are getting in fights with people. We're just not recognized. Back to your point about appreciating people, but we put stigmas. The stigma label in and of itself has a stigma. We think that stigma is just dealing with the downtrodden and not helping them get back to our feet, when actually it's what we do on a day in and day out basis to bucket people.
Right. Well, and I think, going back to stigma is oftentimes, it's almost like we want a file folder of stigma for other people so that we can get to the highest, the worst thing that you've ever done in your life. That's going to be the stigma that I assign to you. And we have to, I think, intentionally realize that, back to the mantra of learning to appreciate people. I'm not perfect. Nobody is. I have value. Everybody does. And so I have to think to myself, okay, let me go back through, the catalog of bad things I've ever done. If I could think of one single thing that's the worst thing I've ever done, I don't want to be known for that. And it might be pretty bad. And I then cannot assume that I can put a stigma on someone else for the worst thing that they've ever done, because there's so much more to me than the worst thing I've ever done. The same is true for everybody else.
What stigmas do you think are put on you?
I think in law enforcement, it's, certainly...
I know a few.
I can imagine. Well, and it's funny, too, that we should almost reverse that conversation and ask you, what stigmas do you have of police officers?
I think I approach it fairly, and I'm not trying to exonerate myself.
Let's go back, though, to an unhealthy time in your life. Go back a couple years when...
I went two extremes. I went from all about supporting police and no matter what happened, to what I consider to be more reality. My opinion changed dramatically. Now, granted, on this side of it, I guess maybe where it's gotten to a more healthy place is I recognize my role and why that changed. Because I put myself in interactions that were stressful with other human beings. They happen to be police officers. Yeah. And in some cases, they were sick of this call. They may have had 4 other ones before. And as many times as I've had to be in handcuffs over the years, particularly over a season about 3 to 4 years. I don't know at what call I was in the day to make this guy a complete jerk to me, or what I may have said, or he may have had a bias because his dad used to act just like I was acting. So I think that it started with me just generally saying, okay, you're law enforcement, you guys put your life on the line, that notion, and I still believe that to be true. Then it got to the place of, wow, there's so many of them that are jerks. And now it's turned more to the fact that I recognize that I can be a complete maniac based on some point in a day, based on 7,000 things that have happened with people around me, and it changes. So I guess over seasons and your social groups and everything else, it does change how you view people. Sure,
but I guess my point on the stigma thing is I can tell you about the stigmas that I feel that I wear. So when I pull up to a call on say it's a domestic. It's not uncommon to go into, and let's just use in this example, a man and a woman that have gotten into a physical confrontation. She has called law enforcement, and in certain states there are laws, if there's any evidence of physical contact, it's a mandatory arrest kind of thing. So we go in and intervene, and then immediately now we're fighting her because she doesn't want to see her husband get dragged off to jail. Yep. So one stigma that we carry is that, we're just all about arresting people. Yeah. And I will tell you, that's true for some police officers, but it's not true for me. And I don't want you to carry, to look at me with the stigma of, well, that guy's an officer, all he's going to do is arrest people. No different than you would want someone saying, well, this guy's he's recovering, so he must do this.
Man, I get it. I mean, on this side of it, I get it. And maybe that's the message I'd like to convey from my heart, is that people are who they are. I mean, for my situation, yeah, there's a lot of stigmas that based on my activity, behavior, and things I did and do that people can actually say, yeah, that's that person, that's Chris. I also want them to judge me based on actually what is happening, the reality of the situation. It's the same way that we get better in life is look at life reality, not based on what we want it to be or wished it had been. The police officer example is actually a good point, because I can think of my one felony conviction was one of the most polite, fair, assertive deputies I've ever been around. He's a good human being, and I have a ton of respect for how he handled the situation. On the other hand, I have a non-charge detainment, I guess is what you would call it, for somebody that was showing off in front of my beautiful ex, who happened to be a beautiful girl, and he was trying to put me in my place. And that was I ran into that only on one, and I have to be challenged to say that was just one man, and the situation that I had created caused him to feel certain ways towards me.
So just to kind of wrap that part of it up, stigmas can be based on reality. Stigmas can be based on facts. So, your experience taught you that, a cop can be this and a cop can be that. I think the bigger thing for us to try to help equip people with is to choose to, not see a stigma or a label or someone's worst moment in a way that you would not, it's do unto others. It's the golden rule, and I have to choose to look at people the same way I hope they're looking at me, even if we disagree. You can be on the total opposite spectrum of a political party with me, and it's not the disagreement; it's the treatment.
That is so true. That's honestly true.
And to me, I think the value there is just really, again, being intentional. I want to have good interactions with people. I don't want to be at odds with them, and I want to be able to navigate differences in a way that respects and values the whole person.
I'm glad you brought that up that way, though, because this is such a hard conversation to have. It's such a hard topic to say, how do we button up in 25 minutes something to share with an audience that makes any sense? But that's it. It's really, again, it's about we were just getting into the weeds about a police officer situation, but the fact of the matter is it could be, we could have overlaid that with Republican versus Democrat, domestic violence victim versus, domestic violence perpetrator. We could do all these types of things. These are very horrible things that people actually do, or not horrible things that people actually disagree with. At the end, it's about recognizing that we both have opinions. It's an opinion. It's not the action. And if your heart is in the right place and you're treating each other with fairness and respect, you can probably still have the same opinion and be all right.
Right. Well, let me leave you with this. To me, and I don't want people, because a lot of people will see this and they'll say, well, I don't want to compromise, meaning I don't want to have to tolerate someone else's bad behavior. I don't want to have to, and it's not that at all. It really, appreciating others really is about seeing intrinsic value. And I believe that's because we're all created. At the very least, if you don't agree with my position on what gives everybody value, everybody does inherently have the same value. If we're all just, random acts from the universe, we are all random acts from the universe. And so we have equal value. I'm not saying to dismiss someone's bad behavior. What I am saying is, instead of just looking at them with that stigma, that one sliver of who they are and what they've done, because they've certainly done, I have value, everybody does. The person, if all you're going to look at is the worst thing that they've ever done, you're going to dismiss every good thing that they've ever done in their entire life or ever will do from now on.
To that point, it's not. I don't think it's fair to dismiss the bad things they've done either. So
right,
it's both sides,
and that's exactly right. But it's seeing person for their value and then addressing the differences. So I mean, it's not easy, and it's something that has taken me years of actually with my buddy Alex, just working through the material, finding sociological studies, and finding ways that we feel like have benefited our interactions, whether it's at home with our family, with our coworkers, with strangers. And again, the goal is to equip people. It's to equip people with the ability to, in our conversation today, get past and in the future avoid stigmas.
Yeah, Brian, I appreciate this, honestly. And I mean, this, I think, is the heart of what we're trying to accomplish here. We are two different people. There's a lot of things that we have commonality on, but the mantra is so between a cop and a criminal. We're a lot of other things.
Yeah.
We absolutely are a lot of other things.
That's it, right there.
We use a stigma to promote this show to a point, but the point is to kind of throw that out there in the mud and stomp all over it, because the fact of the matter is at the end, we have a lot of common things as well. And I have a ton of respect for you as a friend, and I couldn't have said that when I was riding hard in life and making bad choices. Before that, though, I would have. So it goes back to that middle ground. So thank you, for pushing this conversation the way you did. It actually worked out good, I think.
Yeah, I think this is a great foundation for us. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Brian.